Welcome to DABCC Radio,
where smart people listen.
virtualization and cloud talk.
Featuring cutting-edge solutions from the hottest companies around the globe.
Broadcasting from the DABCC offices in sunny Sarasota, Florida.
Surrounded by computers, books, and Legos. Your host, Douglas Brown.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of DABCC Radio. As always, we have a great show for you, and we definitely do. Today, we have an interesting show because we don't have a vendor with us. We have some EUC guys, and I really love when we get the EUC guys because it's a different conversation. It is a conversation about the EUC world. So today, we have a gentleman named Steve Horn and another named Ryan Mangan. And these two are EUC visionaries, long-term guys that have been doing this a long time, and they're here to talk about the EUC world, where we are now, some of the problems we face, a little bit about how to address those problems, and so much more. So I really enjoyed this, recording this podcast, and I think you guys will enjoy listening to it. So with no further ado, here's my interview with Steve and Ryan. Okay, guys, thank you so much for doing this with me. I'm really looking forward to this. These are the type of podcasts I really love because I have two guys. We're going to talk tech, right? Does that sound like fun?
It does, yes.
Perfect. So, well, let's get going. As always, the first question is, who are you? So can you tell us a little bit about each other, can you please tell the people a little bit about me? No. So can you tell us a little bit about you? So let's start with Ryan. Ryan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yeah, so my name is Ryan Mangan. So I've been in the EUC community for around about 15 years now. I started off my career, believe it or not, as like a apprentice chef and then a joiner, then didn't really know what to do and then went into the military. And within the military, I acquired communication skills. I did an apprenticeship in telecommunications. And then fast forwarding on into my IT career and I left the military, believe it or not, it's quite an interesting one, was I had a choice at the time to look at VMware Horizon, View, and RDS 2012 for college. So we were trying to roll out VDI to kind of replace Citrix presentation server. And that's when it really kind of started ramping up, where I spent a lot of time working on this new technology, as we thought at the time, of RDS when they changed from 2008 to 2012. And effectively, we were the first college and first educational establishment in the United Kingdom to roll out RDS 2012. And the sole reason why we chose RDS over VMware was A, the price, but B, we seemed to kind of streamline the whole process. Anyway, long story short, that's when I started really getting into VDI. And then from there, I think I produced over 70 technical articles on RDS and EUC, done a lot of work with VMware and all the other good stuff. And now moving on to Windows Virtual Desktop, done quite a bit there as well.
Perfect. I'll ask you a bit more about streamlining the process. I'm curious about that. I'm an old Citrix guy myself, but the world always changes. I have a lot of respect for what the folks over at VMware is doing, and of course, come on, WVD and the Microsoft boys. I mean, that's bread and butter, right? That's the mothership. So, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, Steve, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, hi, it's Steve Horn. I've been in the EUC space for 20 plus years. I will say 20 plus, grey hair, what's left. Started off, let's say I was going to be a PE teacher, but I figured out there's better things potentially to do than run around with, teaching people how to play cricket and rugby and stuff. But yeah, so started off, really it was from the base level, so like networking, then did some stints with a few ISPs, and from that I did what was you potentially call the application service provision, which became I would say WinFrame, MetaFrame, Citrix, Tarantella, those sort of days. And then from there, worked with a few managed service providers, and then joined a company called VMware for about just shy of 4 years, looking after one of the EUC markets in the UK and Ireland, and then set up a few companies as well. In the past, I've set off with some new technologies called CD-ROM, right the way through to I think today, where we're toying around with MSIX. It's all been fun, with all the same challenges, I think.
It has been fun. It's in my opinion, it's the greatest. Well, of course, it's what we do, right? But it's the greatest space in IT. I mean, AI is pretty cool. IoT is pretty cool, but they're really huge spaces. The EUC space touches the end users. We get to play with all the cool apps. We get to play with servers. We get to play with really all the tools and toys and what have you, and being a part of it for such a long time, it's neat to watch the thing grow, right? It's a lot different. You mentioned WinView and WinFrame. I was first introduced to WinFrame, and from those days till today, it's the same principle, right? It's the idea of remoting into a application or a desktop, but it's so far away. And when I see something like 3D graphics, which has been around for a while now, it still blows my mind, because I come from that world of, just being possible to do this, to where now it's, mainstream. With COVID, everything changed, right? So now it's almost like, okay, this is the future, which is what we wanted. But that being said, what do you guys think about where do you see EUC today compared to, let's say, in the past? And of course, where do you see it going?
So do you want the honest answer to that? Or?
Yeah, of course. I don't want no bullshit, man.
So, I mean, everybody's got their own opinions. So I'll try and give mine first. So my view is that, a lot of EUC was very heavy on infrastructure previously, a lot of effort on building and designing the right infrastructure to support an end user computing environment. That could be, desktops, applications, streaming, various different kind of mediums. And I think what's happening in the dynamic changes, if you look at the likes of Microsoft, Amazon, and other cloud providers, by taking away the infrastructure and calling it IaaS as infrastructure as a service, and the ability to kind of template and script, I think what's happening is we're moving away from the complexities of infrastructure. There's still the need to do a design, but it's not as intensive. You don't have to go and buy thousands of servers and things like that anymore. I think what's happening is we're moving towards the experience, the user experience, the applications, how you deliver them applications, how you deliver a really good experience to that user, and how you access that desktop as well. So device related. I think Microsoft have announced this foldable tablet, the Surface? What do they call it now? It's the, it'll come back to me. But anyway, I think the way the industry is going now, I think that, the streamline of the core infrastructure, and it's all about how do we deliver the apps? How do we give that user, access anywhere? And if you look at how Microsoft are communicating with the audiences now, it's all about, access on any device, anywhere.
Yeah, but that's what it's always been about, Ryan, I think. I mean, in Citrix in the old days in 2003, 2003, they had these big access buttons. But I agree, it's all about user experience, and it was always about that too. We just couldn't deliver it
Yeah, it was conceptual. So the concept was there, but they didn't have the technology to make it happen, I suppose is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, you got it. We'll go down that path a little bit more too. So, Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, from before I joined VMware and when I was at VMware, I always said EUC, there's two things that drove people to EUC. One was the weather and one was the pandemic. And there hadn't been a pandemic. And I think what's happened now is people ask me, they want to move to an EUC platform to work from home, and how can they do that? And I would turn around to them and say, it's easy to do today because it's all cookie cutter. If you went off and said, I want to go to WVD, I want to go to AWS, I want to go to Citrix, and you use their cloud products, if you just want Office, how long does that take to set up? You can set up in minutes. I think that's the bit that causes the most amount of problems is the differences. So from when we were doing the WinFrame and the old school stuff, that hasn't changed. The composite desktop theorem of delivering, applications on an OS, and then user data, and the physical is somewhere else. That hasn't changed. I think the only problem that's changed is user expectation. I think what I did mention on a video I did was around, it's sort of like, consumerization has sort of won because everybody wants a different device. And we're not all streamlined. If we're all on Windows devices, happy days for Microsoft, but I think you've got a Mac, I've got an iPad. We all know what we want, and we're all different, and that's what makes it really cool to have this ability to do this. I would call it a digital workspace because there's so many of them around. All you need to now worry about is that end user getting what they want in that point of time when they need the application that they need. And that's where it becomes, really, really cool today that we're able to do that. I would have said, the cloud has really, it's been an enabler for a lot of these companies as they transition across from, the traditional, I would say, licensing models to the more, pay-as-you-use models.
Yeah, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And I think that the user expectation is one of the big things you said there is that in the old days, it was sort of a user was happy to have a computer at work.
Yeah.
They didn't have a lot of expectation for it. If it didn't work, that was almost the expectation, right? It was like, oh, damn, I got to use this thing, right? Where now they have a computer at home, they have an iPad, they have an iPhone or an Android or what have you. They're used to technology. They're immersed in technology. So the expectation has changed from, just expecting crap to expecting, let's say like Apple experience everywhere, right? It just works. And if it doesn't, they sort of throw a fit. And having their apps, everything today is an on-demand world, right? And I think EUC really helps with that too. If we're able to deliver that experience, if we're able to, to have the right tools and toys there, we can give that on-demand experience more so than you can in, let's say, maybe a distributed fashion. There's the word for it, distributed fashion.
Yeah, but the other thing that it's helping with is IP protection, isn't it? Is, I would say, one of the main drivers behind centralization, I would say, of digital workspaces is, protection of IP and collaboration. You think about what that's enabling, and it's huge value. And then the problem is it's when people are trying to do it. I think when people try and do it for the wrong reasons, it's a project doomed to fail. If they're trying to do it for the right reasons, the project just flourishes, I think. And it's just figuring out what the right reasons are for each individual company.
Well, I definitely agree with that. And being in Germany, and I guess you guys have it too, GDPR, everyone has to deal with it if you're dealing with your EU, right? Is GDPR and data protection rights and things like that. And, back to the old Citrix days, it was always sort of this, we talked about pane and glass security, right? The data sat back at the back end, and we didn't throw it everywhere. And that's just one of the huge benefits of centralized computing. I always tell the story when I was a little boy, before remoting, before any of this, my father would show me computers and mainframes, and he'd scream at me about the PC because he thought it was a stupid idea, because you would distribute all your data. How would you secure it? How would you manage it? How would you deploy it? So when I was introduced to remoting, it made sense to me because it did what you just said, and that is it allowed us to protect our IP, right? And distribute that out, one to many instead of many to one. So
yeah, it's strange because you look at where we've come from, like the late 80s, early 90s, and you think the bulletin board system and stuff like that. I remember using the bulletin board system, and it was like, where's this going to go? And then where you are today, where everybody, the internet is expected, isn't it? You expect Wi-Fi everywhere. Knowledge is just the ability to get to a browser now and just do a search. You can find an answer to anything.
Yeah.
Whether it's correct is a different.
Oh, it really sucks because I used to be able to tease people all the time, and now they look it up. You know?
Yeah. I call Google is now it's almost like the Oracle. What do they say? Other browsers are available, but most Google as being the one that most companies use and most people use as the biggest search engine. I would say it's almost like the old days of having an Oracle to give you answers to stuff, and now it's you just put it in the Google bar and you get pages of answers. All you've got to do is be mindful of the fact that somewhere the correct answer's there.
Yeah. Well, the problem is finding the correct answer, but for the most part, we get it. If you're looking for a specific tech thing, it's definitely there. So we've mentioned, you guys mentioned VMware, Microsoft. Definitely want to go down WVD path there, and I threw in Citrix. Do you see a difference between these technologies, these solutions, these companies today, or what's your view on that?
So I suppose it all boils down to features, access. So how you access, for example, Citrix receiver, VMware's kind of log on. I suppose, if you look at one of the big features, I think, which adds a lot of value, is the watermarking. So for like these legal or these sensitive working areas where people, I know you can restrict access and prevent people from downloading and copying data, but nothing stops you taking a picture. And yes, a watermark just puts an image or stamps that. But, from a court perspective, if there's a watermark of a company and you've taken that data illegally, it makes it much easier to prosecute against. So some of the features these vendors are producing all have their own merits. If you look at Citrix in a WVD environment, it just enhances what's already there. Granted, not everybody will need that, but for all them organizations who are looking for that little bit extra, or the hybrid approach, then Citrix has that answer. So they've all got their place in the market. Again, it's my opinion. Again, it all depends on the specific customer requirement or what if there's something specific a person needs to deliver. So, I mean, you look at all the different technologies out there, because we've got Amazon as well out there, and we've also got Nutanix coming out from the Frame acquisition. They've all got interesting propositions, and to be fair, I've not got my hands around every single technology yet. Specifically, I focused on the VMware and Microsoft stack. But, it'd be interesting to see what these other vendors bring to the table.
I would say a digital workspace is a digital workspace. Protocol battles happened. You were at Citrix, I was at VMware. I think, it's an interesting scenario. If it fulfills the requirements of an end user, I don't think it really, matters now. You've just got to get the right experience from the right provider. It's the end users that are going to suffer if it's not right. And those are the ones that you want to be able to give the right experience to. Now, I think so long as they can deliver, they can all deliver the same thing. They can all deliver some form of OS with applications. Whether you see the OS or not is irrelevant, in my opinion, unless you want to be giving them the native experience. But if you can deliver the maps that they need, it's just a delivery map. And then it all depends on what the strategy is from the underlying company. Some are VMware houses, some are Microsoft houses, some are Citrix houses. Some going down the Nutanix stack. The hyperconverged stuff with Acropolis and stuff like that. But so long as the end user's happy, on an EUC perspective, I think that's the main goal, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah, of course. It's always about the end user. What is IT there for? It's to facilitate the end user to do their job, nothing more.
But the one thing I will say is how many, you've got to then look from the end user back. If you look from the technology up, are you going to get it right? This is where it becomes very tricky, because you're building a platform to deliver, and then you've got to start, looking at the end user to say what their requirements are, and then you've got to meet in the middle and say, this is what the end users require based on the technology stack that we've already got in place. You don't want to do a complete technology change. That's where it becomes a nightmare. What you want to do is try and deliver something that works for the business from let's say from the ground up, but also from the end user's perspective, they're getting actually what they need at that individual point in time.
You got
Ryan
it.
will
But
probably, Ryan will add it from a security standpoint as well. That you've got, you know, he said it right. You know, the one horrible thing about EUC stuff is the security guy who said the worst thing about all this stuff is his enemy is a pencil and paper or a camera. You know, and if you can watermark it, you know where it's come from. You know.
you got it. Anything to add there, Ron?
No, I think Steve covered it, but I think there is this evolution of EUC where people don't really care what the platform is anymore. They're more interested in log on time and delivery of applications and a really simple experience. I mean, I work with various different types of industry, from manufacturing to insurance and finance and legal, and there's like I say, the same kind of pattern across all these different industries. Is it needs to be simple. It doesn't matter if it's someone, you know, processing picking lists, or it's someone using, you know, the Microsoft Office suite, you know, in great detail, or an actuary using an Excel spreadsheet. The same principle applies. It has to be simple, it has to be secure, and they need to get on with their job fairly quickly. And I think that's the focus, because I have seen it where organizations have rolled out VDI and for whatever reason it's not gone well. The IT, outsourcing IT or whoever involved haven't fully understood how to maintain and manage the system. And inevitably the organization deemed it was a safer bet to move back to physical PCs. But then that creates a new issue where you've then got to maintain massive physical hardware, more complex, more expensive purchases on the IT hardware, and then the ability to get the applications on the physical devices. And as you know, home internet and various other things, it's much easier to stream a desktop than it is to download lots of apps in certain rural areas. So there's all sorts of different variables out there, and it's just trying to kind of find the easiest way for that user to get their desktop or applications or both.
Absolutely. That's always about the right solution for the right use case. I mean, that's definitely always the deal. And you guys mentioned protocols too, and I think the protocols are about apples and apples nowadays. And we've also mentioned, you know, the expectation that Wi-Fi is everywhere it is. When COVID hit, some of the telcos were like, "Hey, we'll give you 2 gigs free or 20 gigs free." And I thought to myself, yeah, give me 20, you know, give me 1 billion gigs free. I'm not using any gigs because I'm on my Wi-Fi sitting in my house. You know, it was a great PR thing. People are like, hey, look at these great telcos. Well, nobody used that because they were in their homes. You know what I mean? So, and you put all that stuff together, distribute, you know, deploying a remoting solution is pretty darn simple over, you know, gigabit fiber, right? Or even lowest, you know, DSL or something.
Yeah, I think the interesting one there is, I don't think EUC has ever been stress tested to the point of now ever before. Like millions of people all of a sudden working from home.
Well, that's my next question: is how do you think COVID changed, or you know, did COVID change? How did COVID affect it? So I'll let you continue.
So this was quite interesting. Just going back slightly onto the mobile connectivity. So one of the challenges when COVID first struck was not everybody had the bandwidth broadband connectivity at home. And looking at education, for one example, teachers having to go home in rural areas, you know, talking about the area of York maybe. And the challenge they had was, you know, they had so much data on their mobile phone contract. And then looking at, I did a blog post on it, but effectively we looked at the cost. And effectively when people were connecting using the mobile phone on 4 or 3G, they could run up, if they went over their limit, of up to £700 onwards a month. So some organizations were paying this, and then what happened then is they had to renegotiate contracts with the provider. So there's two issues here. A, ensuring that you've got the correct speed and broadband at home, and B, using mobile data to kind of establish connections. As you know, with mobile data, if a mast goes down, that's you done. But also, if someone cuts through a wire and your broadband is down, there's always going to be that problem. You can't do anything about that. That's just life. But one of the things which tested a lot of the industries was, you know, have we got the correct mobile phone contract? Have we got the right data plan? Because all of a sudden, businesses were starting to incur high costs in mobile data usage. And one of the things which I blogged about was, how do you reduce, like, using VDI, how do you reduce the bandwidth down, the necessity to deliver a reasonable connection without incurring large costs? And that's on my blog site, which is quite an interesting read, because it covers, all these different variables of, delivering either graphic, what the cost of fitting, the speed of a graphics desktop versus, trying to run a 56 kilobit connection. So that was one of the challenges. And then with COVID, again, going back to blog statistics, I saw 16 to 18,000 people in the month of March connect just to look at one specific topic, which was remote desktop gateway. So 16 to 18,000 people were logging on across the globe to look at delivering a gateway solution, to kind of provide a VPN or using RDS to connect. So I think what it did, and Steve will probably go into more detail about this, I'll cover it in a slightly different angle, is I think what it's done is it's forced everybody to stress test and use whatever remote desktop capabilities. When talking to certain distributors and vendors from firewalls, there was a large surge in firewall technologies, and that was not just to premises of businesses, that was to homes as well. So I think what's happened is there's now been, because of the pandemic, there's been a massive change in how organizations and people view access to work and working from home and things like that. And one of the things I must say is I spend more time at home now than I have ever done, because all the facilities are required are at home, and I connect into the office. Occasionally I drive down to the office just for a bit of a day out kind of thing, but there's no requirement for me to go in the office. And that leads me on to the final point, is it's saving organizations money. They can reduce down their office sizes, they can reduce down the cost of paying rent, and that's great for the business. However, that does create a new challenge to landlords and the cost of running buildings, is that effectively you either pay rent for an empty building, or B, it's costing a landlord because no one wants to rent the building. So it's created a whole new set of variables, and I don't know what it means to society, to kind of industries, but I think it's here to stay, and I think a lot more people like myself will probably consider spending more time working from home wherever possible.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. What do I say? Steve, do you have any? Yeah, please.
To be honest,
yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I think to be honest, I think I'll put this on my website. I think is work a thing you do, or is it a place you go? And that depends on what your job is. I think, remote working for a surgeon, it's okay, but he's not going to be able to do any surgery, is he, from home? So there's certain use cases which are perfect for home working. And somebody asked me the other day, he said, what's the next boom industry? And I said, property law. And they said, why property law? And I said, well, if there's all these companies now that are going, will work from home and reduce, as Ryan said, reduce the size of the office space. Well, are some of the big office buildings going to be converted to residential? I don't know. There's a big, in the UK, they're saying there's a big residential issue. Well, all of a sudden there's all this free real estate. What are they going to do with it? Either people are going to take them up. It's a bit like, did you see, I think it was Amazon were thinking about getting all the old malls in America and turning them into Amazon warehouses, weren't they? Because they're just sitting there empty. So they're just reusing them. And I think what it's actually done is shown people that working from home does actually work. I think there was a lot of industries that were very skeptical about it. The users are not going to do, they're not going to work the hours. We can't see what they're doing, all this stuff. And I think what they've realized is you can actually see what they're doing, and if they're working, and they actually work longer hours. And yeah, they might take an hour or an hour and a half off for lunch, but they're working past 5, and the 9 to 5 that is no longer the norm. It's like, most people, if they get up early, they can start work and then finish early or finish late. I don't think once your job's done, your job's done. I think it's a thing you do, not a place you go anymore, unless you need to go somewhere.
That's exactly right. I mean, there's huge benefits to being around your compadres and and being able to have, face to face, and for many different reasons. You're talking to a guy that's never worked from an office. I've always worked from home for 25 years, and from home or in the field, right? When you're out,
Yeah,
out and about.
I think they're trying to readdress that with things like, Teams and.
Oh, I hate it though. Do you like those? Do you? I mean,
No,
sometimes it's okay, but I think they overdid it. It's like completely overdid it.
there's nothing like human contact, as they say, but that's probably the wrong thing to say during an epidemic, which is classified human contact. So, but the problem is that we're all used to meeting, going to a meeting and then having a pint or something afterwards. And now it's really strange. It's like, it's everybody's working, from an office, their own home office, or from, I don't know, a room somewhere in their house, and you can see other people, and you've got why do they have virtual backgrounds? This is the thing, isn't it? We didn't used to have, we never used to have them until very recently. And
it might be related to that video. If you remember when that chap was doing a BBC interview it was in Korea, and his daughter or son kind of crawled into the room, and then he saw his wife run in and grab after. I think virtual backgrounds can hide certain.
I'm so glad you said that one and not the other video.
Yeah.
I don't like the virtual backgrounds either. I'm a guy that used to walk into a person's office, and the first thing I'd look for was the bookshelf. And then I would look for what books really quick, within, 10, 15 seconds, right? Okay, where's the bookshelf? What books do you have? Oh, you have something on C# and, XML or, something like that. Then you could figure out what that person liked, right? Maybe you had some history books in there, psychology or, or something, right? And then you could talk to that person, because if you know a little bit about that, maybe you find a kindred spirit. So it was a nice way of understanding that person really fast, or at least, getting to start to understand that person fast, right? And I like seeing what people's houses look like. Maybe it's a little voyeuristic, but I like seeing it, right? I like knowing what they're doing, or where they are. I like being able to look around and seeing what they have on their wall. Maybe I have the back to the bookshelf analogy, so to speak. I don't like the virtual backgrounds. They drive me nuts, and they're not perfect too. So you see this guy that's missing half a head, and it freaks me out.
Or his chair in the background.
Yeah, I don't like it. So, one of the things, Steve, you said earlier, and it's been a while, so I might mess this up, but you said something about the fact that it's you don't want to change platforms. But now that with the cloud coming, we are changing platforms, and you guys have talked about deep WVD. I want to go down this path. First, I want to ask the question, and it may be a two-part question, right? Open for discussion. One, is now the time to go to the cloud versus, let's say, a data center driven solution, right? And two, is that WVD? And can we move over there? What does that entail? What's your philosophy around that? Your opinion on that whole giant subject?
So,
how long have we got?
Yeah, that's a good question. But I think I can take it from personal experience. So we used to have a data center full of racked Dell 730 servers and things like that, and storage. And we looked at Microsoft Azure as just one example, as the replacement for that. And when we did move, I mean, there was an initial increase in cost, but when we moved, we made significant savings. That was a fact. We had to rationalize what we really needed. Was one aspect. It made us think, do we need this as an organization? Is this just there because someone's precious about this legacy, this application, or this how something works? Can we streamline it? And in the end, we rationalized, we stripped things down, and we made it very simple for ourselves. And we've never looked back. Things don't turn off. We don't have any physical issues. And it is a major cost saving for us. However, that being said, in some circumstances, it's not as easy. Large organizations with multiple data centers, things, it's not that easy. So there is use cases to kind of adhere to, and I don't think it's something everybody can transition to straight away. However, I do think the future of most organizations will be to use some or majority form of cloud. And then when you look at desktop, so Windows Virtual Desktop, which is very close to what I do on a day-to-day basis and what I enjoy doing as well. It's one of the end user computing, and VDI is very much what I get really excited about. But effectively, if you look at obviously building out, one particular customer I worked with in the past, they had 23 physical pizza box servers, which ran 1,000 desktops. And to build all that, set all the networking up, build the image and deploy it out to all these boxes takes forever, right? I mean, I think at the weekend just before the weekend, there was a Azure script released, which effectively you can build the whole environment in a matter of minutes or maybe an hour or so. That's a complete game changer, because if you need a VDI environment or you need to transition, all of the legwork, all of the hard work of putting all the weights and things into the racks no longer exists. You effectively run a few scripts and then you focus back onto the operating system, how it needs to be set up and the user experience of that, and then to the applications. And if I said to everybody, what's the most difficult part of delivering an EUC deployment? What is the most complicated part? People write manuals on deploying a WVD environment. People write manuals on, a VDI environment. That's fairly straightforward to do. All information's there. But how many applications are out there in the world? How complicated are the typical applications? And what about the really complicated applications? The time it takes for people is applications. It's about delivering the app. And that could be a desktop application or a server application. So let's not just narrow it down to VDI or WVD. Let's talk about cloud in general, software as a service, platform as a service as well. So, people say, I've recently worked on a book with Microsoft, getting started with WVD, a quick start. And there was the question I was asked, which I covered in there was, what's the difference between, modern versus traditional applications? And obviously I'm opening up this so Steve can dive into it and add a bit more kind of weight around this kind of question. But effectively, cloud, I believe, enables you to get to the application deployment and delivery side quicker. I think that's the answer for me. I think it's about getting to the hard bit of delivering the applications in the right format for the user. Over to you, Steve.
It's a tough one to answer, because I think from my point of view, the cloud is an enabler, but it depends on what you want to deliver in the cloud. I think if it's a workspace, then it's perfectly, it's been designed to be quick, isn't it? You can, if I was going to say to you, if I said to Ryan, build me a WVD instance, he would say, how many users do you want? And he can do it in a couple of hours. Then it's the apps again. I think the apps are the problem. The apps have always been the problem. I don't know, how many projects have you been on, Doug, with, you turn around to somebody and you go, you've got all your apps in a media library somewhere, and they look at you like you're out of you've fallen off the tree and hit the lunatic branch on the way down. And I think then you say to them, okay, you haven't got them all, but you've got people that know how the apps work. And then they look at you again like you're mad. And this has been half the battle, but then, it's great for EUC, but there's a lot of people out there. And I said earlier, about people don't want to move stuff. Now, the problem that you've got is you're going to have people that have learned Citrix. You have people that have learned VMware. Now, if you say to them, what do you want to deliver? They're going to, of course, say VMware and Citrix,
Sure,
what they know. They don't want to change.
No.
They don't want to learn something new. I think what the cloud is doing is giving them the opportunity to see very, very quickly the difference of how easy they all are to set up. If, and this is going back to my earlier point, if I said to you, if you want to set up, let's say, 1,000, 100,000, X number of users in the cloud, it costs you zero to set them up. When you start utilizing that CPU, RAM, storage, that's when you start paying for it, and you pay for it on an hourly, weekly, monthly basis. And the thing is, to set it up is very, very quick. You can get Office on any of these workspaces very, very quickly, because they've already probably got templates that it's already done. Then you've got to start looking at how they then deliver the wrap, the security, the applications for that user type. And you talk to people and you go, okay, so you've got Active Directory, and they go, yeah, or we've got Azure Active Directory, or they've got something that controls their users. And then you say, and of course you've got them in groups of users based on what their job is, and they look at you again like, what is this magic you're talking about? And I think the problem is a lot of this is education. We're dragging, some companies have already done it. You're going to get companies that have got a perfect setup, and it's easy to transition them. And then you get the others which are just given everybody admin access, and it's application chaos, and it's like, well, it's almost like you might as well start from scratch with them, because let's put them into some form of, I would say, order. But it's very easy to do. And the thing with the cloud is, would you put everything in the cloud? I'd say the biggest problem you've got with the cloud is, would you have one cloud, or would you have, going back to no single point of failure, would you have multiple clouds, or would you have a hybrid approach where you have some of your own tin, somebody else's tin? Would you put some of your most key production stuff on somebody else's cloud? Would you? I don't know, probably not. A lot of people are saying they want some of their best production stuff on their own kit. They colo it, or they stick it in their own data center. The cloud is brilliant for things like test and dev. If you want to spin up a dev server, how long does that take? And how long to spin it down? That's the one question I would ask.
Interesting. So I agree with you. I mean, to me, it's all about the application. It's always been all about the application. And of course, some applications are going to end up as services, like he says, software as a service. But of course, some are, clients for, even a web browser, right? You have to deploy that out, and you have to secure it. You have to deal with the correct plugins, so to speak, and all these other, configurations, make sure they're not visiting sites that could, steal your data, all that stuff, right? And so you have to totally manage that. And then you have those legacy applications. I mean, we've all run into it where you walk into a company and they're still running something that's, so old that it literally has dust on it, which is impossible for an application, but you know what I mean? And what do you see about the future of that? Do you see them getting rid of that, or just stick that on a some sort of old virtual, a WVD, a Citrix, a VMware, TS box, and leave it running forever?
So there's it's a good question. So there is certain organizations who talk about containerization. But containerization been there for some time. It's not changed. If you look at VMware's Workstation, Oracle Box, Quimu, there's all sorts of different containerization platforms out there. And just so I narrow it down a little bit clearer, I'm talking about localized desktop virtualization, where you're able to run an operating system on top of an operating system. So yes, you can run a legacy operating system on a modern operating system, and then obviously have the application within there, containerized. That's great. But then you've got to look at, do you want that legacy operating system to communicate out across the main PC, desktop or whatever onto that network? Will that open up some security holes? And most likely, potentially it could do. It could create risks. I myself have looked into running 16-bit applications natively, and yes, it's great, but that's a plaster. I don't think it is the answer. I think legacy applications will need to evolve and move. But, one of the challenges you have with some organizations, the sheer cost to move from a legacy application to something new is extremely expensive, potentially, depending on how big and what the function of that application is. So containerization is one thing, but then you look at, this new technology which Microsoft, well, it's not that new anymore, but it's still classed as new, as the MSIX piece, where they've looked at the product and they've made some really good enhancements. And then obviously now you can deliver your applications in like a kind of packaged format called MSIX. So every kind of application you download from Microsoft Store are already kind of deployed into that MSIX format. So Yeah, going back to the question on containerized, I don't think that is the answer. I think that, again, is a temporary stopgap plaster. But what was if you could take that legacy application and then deliver it on a modern operating system like Windows? So you take it from XP, for example, and deliver it on Windows 10. Is it still classed as a legacy application?
Yeah, of course.
That's the question. And then I suppose it's only fair to hand over to Steve, who will probably extend on that.
Would you say, here's a question for you then, is it legacy if it's production? Or
yeah,
why,
of course,
why?
of course, it's a legacy application. I mean, legacy can run in production. It's an old application running old technology. It's not being updated. Let's say, well, it's definitely not being updated. I mean, there's legacy applications are all over production, and they require some little bit of difference, right? Now, if you can package that up and run it in a virtual bubble or in a, whatever, right? Like app attached type of deal, it's still a legacy application. It doesn't, legacy doesn't have to mean it sucks.
Correct.
It just means that's old, right?
Correct.
It usually sucks, but it doesn't have to be.
I think the biggest problem that you've got is this. It's not that the application has issues. It's what does that application also need? So if
an app runs on top of an API, right? And whether or not those APIs are sitting on that OS anymore is a different thing, right?
Think more base as well. If I said to you, there's an XP machine and it's talking to a CNC machine and it's got a card in it. What bus type did an XP machine have? And if I said to you, put that card in a Windows 10 machine, would you then be scratching your head going, oh, hold on a second, this card won't, it's the difference between an ISO and a modern bus, isn't it? It's so different.
Yeah, it might require serial ports or something. I haven't seen one of those in a while.
Yeah, I must admit, looking at the old, even some Windows 10, when, if you're talking about MSIX and when MSIX becomes the mainstream, then we're talking there's a lot of apps for Windows 10 that are going to need converting. And converting a Windows 10 app to a Windows 10 MSIX format is easy because it's been run for Windows 10. But when you look at the older ones, you've still got to look at considerations for physical peripherals that need, that need to be thought about. Because, I think people often forget, that app is production because there's no other app. It's got to be that app because the company's not around, and the machine it's sitting on is worth so much money. And this is the thing. It's not the machine it's sitting on; it's the machine it's talking to is worth a whole heap of money versus the XP machine or the Windows whatever machine it's being replaced. Because what's that? £200-400 for a machine potentially versus whatever the cost of a CNC machine is, which is not a couple of £100. At the end of the day, and it's also, you've got to take into the emotive factor. So some people are attached to an application because it's what they've always had. But there's got to be a point when they've got to actually look at, retire or replace an application based on the fact that it is so old. And there are better ones out there. And some people are still emotionally attached to these apps. It does happen.
Yeah, you bet. So we've talked a lot about a lot of things, and the world's changing from, as we well talked about. What about the endpoint? One thing, if you think about, of course, I'm a little bit selfish from this, perspective. I do work at Agile, traditional or not traditional, but what people might traditionally think is a thin client. But we're still deploying all this stuff on big giant Windows devices or Macs or what have you. Do you think it's time for something, for the endpoint to change, maybe to, as I like to say, an Apple TV style device that does nothing more than to present our desktop to us, or an application, our browser, whatever? What do you feel about the endpoint?
So if we look at where the gaming industry is going, that's already starting to happen. They're starting to offload the kind of core mechanics of that endpoint to the cloud or to the gaming servers to do most of the work for the gamer or the user. And then when we look at the thin clients, and I mean, there's all sorts of different variants out there. But I must admit, I am very fond of the Agile USB stick. It just, convert anything. But the interesting thing here is all about use cases. So some organizations may want to deliver a light form of applications on a desktop, which allows people, let's say, for example, go on a train and go under quite a few bridges and they have no access to the internet. They can still work and do bits and bats. And then when the connection comes back, they can then obviously reestablish. And they can use like the Microsoft Office 365 suite to sync OneDrive and files, right? So they're not tied to the desktop locally for them files. Once they reestablish a connection, it'll resync their files to the cloud and then they can use whatever desktop. So, you know, it's like that global roaming experience. But when you're looking at office PCs, or you look at, I don't know, like loan companies or banks or whatever, you know, do you really think it's required to deliver a full-blown desktop PC? It'd make more sense, you know, and again, this is why it's a use case, is to deliver a thin client type of technology, because from just looking at security, if you take a thin client, what can you do with it? That's a fundamental question. The answer is nothing, because unless you've got the credentials to log in to the remote system, as it were, you know, it's unusable. So that's a massive security benefit. And that's just one thing. The other thing as well is having a lightweight operating system, and all of your effort is in the cloud, or, you know, via remote VDI solution across another data center. If you look at Microsoft Teams, with the recent announcement from WVD, where the AV redirection, the ability to do WebRTC peer-to-peer. So by having a lighter weight operating system, for example, like Linux, and then connecting into WVD, being able to do peer-to-peer, you know, using a lighter weight operating system allows more physical resource available for that endpoint, which then effectively means that you're going to be able to maximize experience to that user. So there's all these different kind of use cases. So if you're static, I think thin clients are here to stay. If you are more roaming, there could be a use case for roaming thin clients, potentially, depending on where you are in the communications and mobile networks and things like that. But, you know, then you've got the Windows clients as well. So, you know, having a laptop or a tablet, or the new type of, a foldable phone book from Microsoft Surface. You know, there's various different they're trying to cater for everybody, but it's a difficult one because it's all down to specific user requirements, right? There's nothing set in stone. But my view is, I think thin clients are definitely here to stay. What does surprise me still to this point is, you know, Microsoft say that by using their native Windows 10 desktop, you get the best experience. I know that might be just Microsoft specific or just how they market their stuff. But obviously you're leveraging all the capabilities. But it'd be great to see, you know, this level playing field where you can get that same experience. It doesn't matter if it's on Microsoft, Apple Mac, or, you know, Linux. It doesn't matter. It'd be really good to see that, because that kind of means a true anywhere, doesn't it? It's not, you know, there's not different advantages to different things. It's like a net neutral kind of environment.
Steve, anything to add? What's your view on that?
I think that as we all come out of this and offices change, I think hot desks and thin clients will be more prevalent. I do think that there's a lot of companies missing a trick by doing the conversion from, you know, if they've got old machines, instead of throwing them away, just convert them to a thin client. You know, it's something that you can do. But I do think that as we change and people work from home, you know, from home, everybody, you know, they just log on with whatever they've got. So being able to offer, you know, a hot desking facility, you know, it happens, you know, the call centers all do thin clients, don't they? They all have the uniform ability to do this. And I think with the multimedia redirection sort of stuff now, it just makes it a hell of a lot easier. I think thin clients were always, They need to be told, you know, they're easier to manage. You know, you can manage them from a central point and you can push stuff down to them. And the other thing about them is the security. As Brian said, if anybody steals a thin client, they've just got a box. You know, what's the point? You know, it's not like you're stealing a laptop. You know, there's nothing on it. You know, and that's the benefit. That's the real thing I think will happen going forwards. I think as companies change, I don't think there will be, you know, desks. I think there will be just screens with, you know, potential thin clients that you just rock up to. You don't even need to bring a laptop to work. You just go in and sign in. And I think that's going to be quite interesting going forwards.
you
It
got
started to happen before. People were just putting banks of hot desks in, but they would still say, bring your laptop in. And I think, it's a bit like I've been to go to work at places and they said, we're going to supply you with a laptop. And I said, well, why do I need two? You don't. Just give me a thin client. I remember before there was one company that did a survey to their senior execs and they said, a laptop and desktop or thin client and iPad. And they went for the iPad option with the thin clients at work, because it's the future, isn't it? If you can have an iPad and a thin client, what more do you need?
I think they're different. My problem, I have a 12.9-inch iPad and a bridge keyboard and trackpad and all that, and it's still
so you've
not
got a
there
laptop.
yet. I don't. I have laptop power without the functionality.
Yeah.
I was really hoping iOS 14 would change that, but so far not. I'm running the betas, and it's still a content consumption device for me. But they'll get there with that, right? I see. I mentioned Apple TV for a reason, and I bought the first Apple TV. I pre-ordered the thing. I thought it was pretty cool, and if you remember back, if you had one in those days, it was you actually downloaded the movie and then you ran it locally. That's how it worked. And which sort of sucked because you didn't have a lot of drive space. You had to wait. It's like, okay, let's watch a movie. Okay, let's wait an hour for it to download, and then we can watch a movie. And then they went to the streaming. Of course, technology changed, but and I think that's but it's the same analogy with I hate the word thin client, because when you think about a thin client, you have this preconceived notion that it's a slow and chunky device that nobody wants. I think that iGel's definitely proved that that's not the case, and there's other companies out there that do it too, that it's much more than that old clunky crap. And not even in the same ballpark. So to me, it's like the Apple TV analogy where, I could stream or, copy this down locally, install it and run it. But I don't need to. I can stream it, so to speak, and run it locally. And to me, that's the future. Now you're going to have different use cases, right? You're going to have people that need offline. Maybe maybe there'll be a shim that sits down there and streams a little bit and it plays offline. I don't know, but then you're also going to have the people that want the touchpads. Also these children, these, not even the millennials that I like to pick on, but the ones much younger than them, that are, that don't even know what Microsoft is. Everything's Google, right? Jed Ayers, the CEO at iGel, he's like, my kids have no clue who Microsoft is other than me talking about them, because everything they do is on Google, right?
The interesting thing about that is Google have done what Microsoft did to us, to our kids.
In what sense?
When we were at school, Microsoft was everywhere.
Sure.
And now all the kids have got Google at school. So
Google Suite.
Sure.
Well, it's a toss-up between Google and Microsoft, but mainly Google, yeah.
I actually say, it's like, you get them young, and then as they go through, they expect, it's like, you rock up at work and you want to know where Office is. It's the open Office argument, isn't it? Where people were trying to give open Office away, and people were like, well, this isn't Microsoft Office, but it did exactly the same thing. The same as Google Docs. It's exactly the same thing as Office, but people just want what they know.
Yeah, of course.
Education, it's like, they know, a little bit of education, they would actually see that it's the same, but they would say this vanilla ice cream is different to that vanilla ice cream.
But vanilla ice cream is my favorite ice cream. There's much differences.
Yeah.
Doug, I've got a question actually for you. So you mentioned about you shouldn't really call them thin clients. So what would you call them then if they're not a thin client?
That's such a good question, because it's something we've been discussing. I've been at iGel 3.5 years now. When I first came to iGel, I said, you got to get rid of the word thin client. And they were like, why? And I said, because people think of them slow and chunky, and it's something nobody wants. And half the people you insult because they've been selling thin clients for a long time. The other people are sort of scratch their head, and then there's a small percentage that says, "I get it," right? And so we've been trying to think of a phrase for it, right? What we call it now is a modern cloud delivered desktop or device endpoint, edge device, edge OS.
Edge OS.
And I call it a modern desktop. right, or modern operating system, right? Because really at the end of the day, what iGel's doing, and this is not, again, not unique to iGel, there's other folks that do it, is forget about the damn hardware. You know, it's because what we sell is an operating system. That's how we sell the license. And then you can buy a piece of hardware with it, right? And you get what you do is you buy the license and the piece of hardware, and then, you get them both, right? Or you can use your existing hardware. Like you mentioned, you convert anything, right? So what we're selling to you is an operating system that is a cloud OS, right? For that world. I've been doing Citrix since the 90s, and everything we talked about with ROI and TCO and all the benefits of centralization, but yet we still use the same device. So that ROI wasn't really real because we were still we weren't getting rid of management. We're still managing the endpoint too. Now we had to manage both, right? So but the problem was the thin clients in those days sucked. But now they're not that. So to me, it's I like to call it an operating system that was designed for Citrix, designed for Microsoft, designed for VM, designed for remoting environments, right? So that's my personal opinion on it.
I think I was chatting, I think it was to Ryan. I think the interesting thing is that everybody expects the same user experience. So I think when you're talking about ROI, there's no, what they want is for somebody to be able to get onto, their operating system with their applications. So things that were usually in ROI sort of calculations were things like education budgets, for training users on how to use stuff that they already know, because users now have got to a point where they expect that same experience. So if they're used to a Windows machine and they move to a thin client, they should get the same experience that we know.
Well, they do though. So if you think back to the Apple TV, did anyone have to train you on how to use a Roku or an Apple TV or an Amazon Fire? No, right?
Yeah,
because you just plugged the thing in and it worked. But I did have to train someone how to use Windows. I did have to train him to not, do this, and this, and I can go on for 5 hours, right? So if you have that single point, that device that does one thing, the one thing they need to do that opens the gates to everything, which is what we're talking about, the ability to send everything down that wire, right? Any place, anywhere, anytime. That is, to me, and this has been my belief way before iGel, right? Again, we just couldn't deliver it back then. The same as I believed in remoting before it was, really, you could do 3D graphics, and all this other great stuff we can do today, right? So I think the time is right. It's only going to get better. I would love to see an Apple TV style device, a really cool, small little piece that's powerful. Citrix sells those Pis, right? But the problem with the Pi is it's still, even with Pi 4, it's still flaky, right?
If they can deliver the same experience irrespective of the application from the data center, then the endpoint, so long as that has the ability to differentiate, then
just
everybody wins.
It's just a piece of hardware with an operating system, right? As long as that OS is the right client, and then the right hooks into, the right peripherals. At the end of the day, it's about peripheral support, right? If we start talking desktops, and so forget about application, because to me, Citrix, Microsoft VMware is application. You're deploying an app, right? You're sending an app somewhere, right? And at the endpoint, it's about peripherals. It's about, okay, I can support these 3 monitors. I can give them this high res that they need. I can run this barcode scanner or this weird device for medical or a bank, right? And we run into these all the time, some weird, and talk about legacy. You have legacy apps, but you also have legacy peripherals too, right? So can you support that? And why was Windows so great? And why is Windows bloated, right? Windows is bloated not because of shitty code. Well, maybe. But it's really bloated because they have drivers for everything under the sun for the past 25 years, So, and this is where you run into some issues maybe with Mac or definitely Linux, right? Because the driver support isn't there the way it wasn't within Windows. So, and we see that sometimes people want to do the Windows thin client versus the Linux. Now, iGel, we're really great at, if somebody needs a driver, we can get it for them. So that's my view. Thoughts? Did I stump you on that one?
Yeah,
Did I go on my soapbox?
No, I think that was it was really good. That
I think the driver issue is trying. I think, if you think about it, everybody's trying to address the elephant in the room, isn't it? The driver problem. I don't think anybody's doing a very good job at it. You always come across one that you've never seen before, and that's when you start to wonder, how on earth, are people still using these, you might as well say these legacy applications still in production when they can't move it. They can't move it because of that reason.
Yeah, you got it. There's many reasons. Like I said, you have legacy applications, you have legacy peripherals too. And
the peripheral problem people often forget. They don't usually think about a peripheral. They don't think that, hold on, let's take you look at a modern Windows 10 machine and say, stick an RS-232 cable in it, and you're looking at a USB port, Yeah,
that's it. Or a my new MacBook with, 4 USB-C the things on it. Or even what's even worse is like a MacBook with one. And it's like, okay, what do I do now, right? And does it have this? There's a lot to it, right? As everyone out there knowing, we can all sit there and go down the horror stories of all this stuff we have within our environments, or maybe it's just one thing we have left, but that one thing will never die, right? And that's, back to what is legacy. That's legacy, right? We would love to kill it, but we never will until it just kills itself. Or maybe you pull the plug on accident. Wink, wink. Okay, guys, we've chatted for so long, and we better call this a show because people will start complaining that we talk too long. But I've really enjoyed chatting with you guys. It's a blast. This is what I enjoy is podcasts like this. So I really appreciate your time today. I have one last question, and that is, if somebody wants to learn more about you guys, you had mentioned, Ryan, you had mentioned your blog. Maybe you can share your Twitter, LinkedIn, or your website blog URLs with the folks so they can follow you and learn more from you.
So sure. My blog's ryanmangansitblog.com, so you can't get that one wrong. And my Twitter handle is @RyanMangan. You can also find out some of the stuff we're doing at appattach.co.uk.
And Steve?
If you look at my Twitter, it's @SS Horn, but you're not going to see much because I don't really tweet that much. But when I do, it's insightful. That's one thing to say. If you want to look at the website, it's ssh2.xyz, and there's a lot of stuff in there that leads to things like AppCure and the AppAttach stuff as well. So,
perfect.
It's been great talking today.
Hey, thank you guys so much. We'll have to have you back on, and we'll continue this conversation. I think we can talk for hours upon hours, right?
Certainly. Thanks again, Doug.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes another successful episode of DABCC Radio. I really enjoyed today's episode. I hope you guys did too. I can't believe we talked for an hour. So I'm sorry about that. Well, I'm not sorry. I've always said the podcasts I personally enjoy the most are the ones that are longer. And they're longer because I'm having fun. I'm chatting. I don't put a limit on it. Sometimes, my guests might have a hard stop at the top of the hour or something of that nature, but I try to schedule time with them to last, maybe an hour and a half to make sure that we don't end up with a hard stop. Because if we're having a good conversation, if I'm having fun, I hope that you have fun listening. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please tell a friend. And if you did not, please tell me, right? This is what I always say. And if you'd like to be on the show, message me, brown@igel.com or dbrown@dabcc.com, and I'd love to have you on the show. Always looking for good, fun people to chat with. So please message me, and we'll definitely do that. It's my pleasure, and like I said, and like I always like to say, my favorite part about these podcasts is I get to learn along with you. So I hope you enjoy them. What else do I say? But thanks to each and every one of you guys for listening. It's the end of my day, so you can sort of tell I'm stumbling my words. I'm tired. It's Monday today, so I don't know when I'm going to post this. Probably Tuesday. Anyway, doesn't matter. Thank you all for listening to DABCC Radio.
CC.
DABC.
Say it again. DABCC.
DABC.
Can you say it again? DABCC.
DABC.
How about DABCC?
DABC.
DABCC.
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 DABCC.